Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are in the world, we appreciate you being with us right now. This is Lovey Life, a Dome podcast. Dome is a digital and bilingual media company specialized in law at a supranational level. So, for all news, comments, analyses related to law in Africa and in the rest of the world, go to our website dome-online.com and follow us on our social media platforms, the links of which are listed below. This, however, is neither a technical nor a political podcast. To be honest, sometimes it's barely a legal one. The only prerequisite needed is to have an open mind and 30 minutes or so to spare. We sometimes will have guests from everywhere around the world, and we will always be keen to hear your thoughts. We have a fantastic episode for you today, so please stay with us and weigh in while we argue the case. Lovey Life. It is that time again, people. The once every 4-year time. The biggest and greatest show on earth. It is World Cup time. Whether you are a fan of football or completely indifferent to the actual sport, there is usually during that tournament a global euphoria, a feeling of togetherness, genuine camaraderie, friendly banter, and excruciating anguish. Every continent in the world is represented. And, in the new format of the competition, countries battle to the bitter end. And, after 7 matches, only one will get to be crowned world champion. Tourists, news stations, public figures, companies looking for exposures have highlighted this period on their calendar and plan to flock there. For 3 weeks, all eyes are on the host country. And man, oh man, is this statement true for this edition. FIFA, which is the governing body of football around the world, has awarded the organization of the tournament to Qatar 12 years ago, in December 2010. And, to be sure, the country had gone all out with their bid. Futuristic designs for stadiums, one football legend after another becoming an ambassador and vouching for it, and one of the biggest marketing points at the time was that it would be the first edition of the World Cup to be played in the area of Maghreb Mashrek, and that it would be high time that a predominantly Arab country also host the competition. They delivered a solid presentation. There is no point in denying that. That is why they got to host the competition. I remember very distinctly when it was announced. Experts in the press were asking how in the world were we going to have a World Cup that is traditionally held in summer in Qatar. Temperatures rise to ridiculously high level, well over 40 degrees Celsius in the shade, and we are expecting athletes to exert themselves for 90 plus minutes. It does not take a football fan or a medical professional to realize that it was not only ludicrous, it was dangerous. Qatar floated around the idea of having the matches set at night when the air was cooler, or built stadiums with retractable rooftops so that the temperatures would drop. Both ideas were, of course, unpracticable, and rather than looking at it coldly, no pun intended, and realize that this choice was not in the best interest of the players, therefore the tournament, both FIFA and Qatar eventually decided to have the competition during the colder month in the country, meaning November and December. They did say it was a World Cup of first. The problem is, of course, that this new timeline clashes with the regular leagues that are well underway around the world, and that has very practical consequences. You see, when the competition is held in late June and July, the athletes are a month removed from the daily grind of the season, so they are fresher, both physically and mentally. To put a World Cup in the middle of a regular season is not, in my opinion, okay. These men have been at it since August. The bodies are tired, the muscles are sore and more prone to injury. This is not me saying it. It's the former athletes looking out for the current generation. And the events leading up to the competition prove them right. Just about every squad has an injury list that is growing by the day. France, for example, defending champion, has lost, among other players, Karim Benzema, who is none other than the 2022 Ballon d'Or, a distinction that is awarded to the most prolific player of the year. His runner-up, Sadio Mane of Senegal, will also not be in attendance after having been injured in a regular match with his club. This may sound insignificant or trivial to you, or even to I, but then again, we must put things into context. World Cups happen every 4 years, and sports favor the young. It is extremely cruel, in my opinion. As a fan of the sport, the players should have never been put in that situation to begin with, and it has nothing to do at this point with the host country. I am personally mad at the football governing body for failing its player. That is my opinion, and you are entitled to think I'm wrong. Speaking of the host country, Qatar has been in the news over the years for human rights violations, and FIFA has certainly been accused of condoning the situation. Now, this podcast is titled Lovey Life. As much as I would like to, I am not just rambling about sports. I thought it fair and constructive to unpack what exactly people mean by human rights violation. So, disclaimer here. In this episode, we are only going to talk about the legal points that are specifically related to the World Cup. I am aware that there are other crucial human rights violations we could talk about, and we may start a series dedicated to human rights violations around the world if you're interested in that. But, for this episode, we will only focus on issues related to the attribution of the World Cup, if it is alright with you. Also, let's frame the issue. Qatar has signed the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. I would refer to that instrument as the Covenant. The country must therefore abide by all the rules laid down in it. And this is the instrument that we will talk about mainly. There are, of course, other instruments, but we don't have time and you may not be interested in all of them. So I just picked one that I thought would illuminate our discussion. Now that it is clear, let's dive in. The spotlight shone first on the labor force used to build the infrastructure needed for the tournament years and years ago. For context, Qatar's migrant population is more than 2 million people and comprise approximately 95% of its total labor force. I don't know if you realize what it means. Basically, the country, which keeps building higher and higher towers, relies almost exclusively on migrant workers to do so. It is wild when you think about it. By the way, if you are interested in the topic of migration, we talked about it in our last podcast, so it would be a good segue. You may want to give it a listen. Human Rights Watch has conducted extensive reviews and surveys regarding human rights in the country, and has found out that there is widespread wage abuse by companies, including unpaid overtime, delayed, inaccurate, or withheld wages, as well as the classification as natural death by the Qatari authorities of the death of thousands of migrant workers. That is not great. At the heart of the migrant workers' conundrum in Qatar and in many countries in the Gulf is the system of kafala, which means sponsorship, which is a British-era legacy which ties the migrant workers' visa to their employers. So the latter, the employers, have virtually unchecked powers over migrant workers, especially regarding their residency and status in the country, which in turn, of course, leaves the migrant workers in a state of fear and make them potentially more compliant to the orders they receive, however legal these orders may be. To be more specific, under the kafala system of Qatar, there are 5 rules that we may need to direct our attention to. The first one is that migrant workers need to have an employer act as their sponsor to enter the country. Now, to be fair, that legal requirement is not unprecedented. This is the case for many categories of migrants around the world. For example, students in the United Kingdom need to be sponsored by their universities in order to receive a Tier 4 visa. It is a way to regulate legal migration and, yes, to operate a selection into the profiles of people wishing to become part of the society of a country. One cannot, in good conscience, say that this simple rule is, per se, a violation of human rights. The second rule of the kafala, or sponsorship system, is that the employers have to secure and renew migrant workers' residency and work permits, and they have the ability to cancel these at any time. Now we're getting in murkier territories, because this rule may contradict the Article 7.b of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Covenant, which states that, quote, "The states parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to just and favorable conditions of work, which ensure, in particular, safe and healthy working conditions." End of quote. Indeed, if an employer can cancel work permits and residency at any given point without giving any justification, he holds a lot of power over the head of his employees, and the conditions of health and safety in the workplace may be debated. The third rule of the kafala system is that migrant workers must obtain their employer's consent to leave or change jobs. There we are, people. I don't need to read you the relevant section of the covenant for you to feel, at best, extremely uneasy with that requirement. But, because we're trying to be exhaustive here, Article 6 of the covenant states that, quote, "The states party to the present covenant recognize the right to work, which includes the right of everyone to the opportunity to gain his living by work, which he freely chooses or accepts, and will take appropriate steps to safeguard this right." End of quote. The emphasis here is, of course, on the free choice to do and accept a job. If one is in a situation where he or she no longer wants to do a particular work, but cannot secure his or her release because he or her employer does not want to sign off on it, then we are in a situation of forced labor. There's no way around it. And there is no legal avenues to make an employer change his or her mind. That's a real problem. Qatar is not respecting its international obligation, but that is secondary to the fact that it turns a blind eye to potentially forced labor situations. It's really worrisome. The fourth rule of the kafala system, yes people, it's not over yet, is that there is a crime, which is a legally punished offense of absconding. And that is a situation where an employer can report a migrant worker missing and automatically the migrant becomes undocumented, can be arrested, detained, and deported. Furthermore, there is nothing in the national legislation to ensure that this rule is not abused. Think about it. Someone may be sick for a couple of days or ask for some time to deal with a personal matter. Nothing more innocent than that. And yet, his or her employer can pretend without having to prove it or being challenged for that matter that he has stopped coming to work. And for that, a migrant may lose his documentation and be deported. The number of international rules that this would break is staggering. Let's just point one from the covenant. Article 7.d, for example, which states that the state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to the enjoyment of just and favorable conditions of work, which ensures, in particular, rest, leisure, and reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay, as well as remuneration for public holidays. End of quote. Nothing about the mechanism of absconding, as laid out right now, is fair or just, and the right to rest and have reasonable limitations of working hours is seriously challenged. The last rule of the kafala system, sponsorship system, that we have chosen to highlight is that for a migrant worker to leave the country, he would require an exit visa, which sometimes requires the employer's consent. So all around, that's not great. This is a fairly clear-cut case of a limitation, a restriction of the freedom of movement. By the way, it goes without saying, but I will say it anyway, the kafala or sponsorship system obviously does not apply to citizens of Qatar. So that in itself is a discrimination and a violation to the right of work as it is understood at the international level. This system, the kafala system that we've just talked about, was in place when FIFA attributed the World Cup to Qatar in 2010. We have to be fair here. Since 2017, Qatar has made a commitment to replace the kafala system with an employment contract system, and we must point out that in theory, migrant workers no longer need an exit visa to leave the country, nor are they required to present a certificate of non-objection from their original employer if they want to change jobs. The new measures are, according to Human Rights Watch, however, poorly enforced. So, the control of the employer remains extremely strong over his employee, which again, I don't think I have to make the case for it, is not compliant with human rights law. Also, the country prohibits migrant workers to join trade unions and or participate in strikes, which is a flagrant violation of the Article 8 of the Covenant, which states in part, quote, "The states parties to the present covenant undertake to ensure the right of everyone to form trade unions and join trade unions, subject only to the rules of the organization concerned for the promotion and protection of one's economic and social interest. No restrictions may be placed on the exercise of this right other than those prescribed by law, and which are necessary in a democratic society in the interest of national security or public order, or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others." End of quote. Now, one is entitled, obviously, to have opinions about unions. I just mentioned that case because it gives me the opportunity to talk about a fascinating, in my opinion, legal mechanism in international law, which is the concept of reservations. When a state agrees to sign and/or ratify an international instrument, such as a covenant we've been talking about during this episode, it has the option of opting out of certain clauses, meaning not being bound by the specific portion of a treaty, a convention, an agreement, etc., etc. But the state also has the possibility to make a reservation, which is in a nutshell a footnote, an asterisk, specifying something, usually its own construction of a particular section of the instrument. In this case, Qatar included a reservation for Article 8 of the Covenant that we just read, stating that the country would construe this provision with its own national law. And when you look at the labor law of the country, there is an Article 116 that affords to Qatari nationals only the right to form workers' associations or trade unions, depriving migrant workers of their right to freedom of association and to form trade unions. This is a prime example of the ambivalence between justice and law. Reservations are certainly a valid, legal, and lawful mechanism. The consequences of these reservations, in this particular case, I believe, are unjust. However, despite Qatar's position about migrant forming trade unions and associations, a few weeks ago, in October, there were reports of migrants staging a strike to protest against the wage abuses, including from companies that were associated with construction projects for the FIFA World Cup, because they had not been paid in months. This happened even after the country introduced in 2015 a wage protection system and a workers' support and insurance fund, both designed to make sure workers get compensated for the work provided. Also, under pressure from the International Labour Organization, Qatar committed to allow joint committees that include representatives of both the company and its workforce. The first committee was established in 2019. There seems to be at least a legal effort to implement some changes, and it has to be highlighted. It remains to be seen if those remedies will be effective in spearheading a change for the better. The last issue we will talk about, and I saved it for last, would be the very crucial, actually the most crucial issue of the migrant workers' death that may have been caused by the working conditions of the labor force hired to build the infrastructure needed for the World Cup. Data vary greatly about the number of people that actually died during the construction of these projects, but medical research found a clear correlation between heat stress and death in young workers dying of cardiovascular problems in the summer months. Now, people, this is Qatar we're talking about. Summer is almost year-round, and the legislation in place categorized these deaths as non-work related, which, as a consequence, prevent the families of these people from receiving compensations from employers. In May 2021, Qatari authorities issued a ministerial decision on heat protection, preventing work outside between June 1st and September 15th between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. when the temperature is 32.1 degrees Celsius, and granting the workers the right to stop working if they believe that heat is detrimental to their health and safety. This is a welcome step, but you have to take into account what we've said earlier about the imbalance of power that exists in the relationship between employer and employee, and the fear of retaliation the employee may face if he or she decides to stop working due to the heat. That is what has happened in the country during the preparation of the World Cup. As is always the case, the same situation can be seen from different angles. In this case, one angle is to say that what is happening in Qatar is a human, moral, and legal tragedy, and that they are being rewarded by hosting one of the most prestigious tournaments on earth and getting the exposure that goes with it. The other angle is to say that the situation is a work in progress, with baby steps taken to right situations that needed to be addressed. Adopting the latter point of view is clearly the choice FIFA has made. It has stood side by side with Qatar, and both have jointly launched in October 2019 a sustainability strategy for the 2022 FIFA World Cup, which aim is to promote the rights and welfare of workers engaged on the tournament sites. This has also led to one of the most unhinged and downright bizarre press conference in recent memory in any industry, when the president of FIFA, the governing body of football in the world, a Swiss national, launched in an impassioned speech to defend its institution and its tournament, said the day before the opening ceremony, and I quote, "Today, I have very strong feelings. Today, I feel Qatari. Today, I feel Arab. Today, I feel African. Today, I feel gay. Today, I feel disabled. Today, I feel migrant worker. And I feel all this because what I've been seeing and what I've been told. Since I don't read, otherwise, I would be depressed, I think." End of quote. He then went on to compare his own experience as a red-haired boy who did not particularly speak German when he emigrated to Switzerland, to that of the people whose rights have been violated in the country. It was a genuinely cringe-worthy moment. If you want to experience second-hand embarrassment, the video is available, everywhere. Core reality is that at the end of the day, despite all of that, what's been plastered in the news everywhere, there's only one question that needs to be asked. Are you not entertained? If the answer is yes, we are entertained, people will watch this World Cup. Despite all of it, human rights violation and all. This is human nature as well. Let's not beat around the bush. And I guess we will have our answer by the end of December, when we know how many of us have actually watched the competition. Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to hear what you have to say. Do you have any comments, question? Does it make sense? Does it not? Leave a comment below the link of the episode on our social media platforms using the hashtag LoveyLife. The transcript of the program will be available on Dome's website in both French and English. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing, liking it, and subscribing to the show. We have had some great episodes previously, and we would be very grateful if you would consider listening to them. We will be back with our next episode next Wednesday. In the meantime, please stay safe and take care of yourself.